coming back to the question of many assets on sale, and of course, you've said in the past that one way of growing could also be through inorganic route. So what are your plans over there, and how will you fund that particular bit? Is there another fundraising on the anvil to really have a war chest to take advantage of the situation right now?
Well, as I said earlier, we have sufficient capital sitting with us right now to do another 1.5 gigawatts worth of projects. Now, of course, we have that pipeline, but that money will be spent over time. So certainly, if an attractive opportunity shows up on the M&A side, then we can certainly move very rapidly and raise capital for our pipeline subsequently as well. It may fast forward our capital raise by a few months, but that is something that we can certainly manage to do. The question really for us is, are we able to find attractive opportunities or not? And that is something that we're currently struggling with. We're looking at a lot of opportunities, but as I said, we need to have a little bit more pragmatism on the part of sellers. Otherwise, it's hard for deals to happen.
What are your foreign investors saying? What is their view on the valuation bet on Indian renewable energy space?
I think, look, the one thing that I have personally learned is that if you're not disciplined about project selection and about maintaining the right kind of, doing the right kind of projects and maintaining the right kind of returns, you will not get future capital. And I think one of the reasons that we've been able to raise 4 rounds of equity capital so far at higher valuations as we've progressed, as the risk in the execution has gone down, is primarily because we've chosen to do projects that have been at a certain level of returns. And so I think one thing that we are not willing to compromise on is really that discipline that we've built up in terms of the kind of returns that we get on our projects. Because that ultimately is the bulwark or the fundamental basis on which new equity providers will assess us. So that discipline is very critical, and part of the reason we have so many assets for sale is because some of the other developers in the industry will not be able to maintain that same level of discipline. So I think that is really fundamental to execution in this sector, or for that matter, really in most other infrastructure sectors.
So what would be the enterprise value of ReNew Power at this point?
So, you know, today we have raised 4,000 crores of equity. We have raised 6,000 crores of debt. So purely at book value, our book value is about 10,000 crores of an enterprise value. Having said that, the last valuation, or the last round of funding we did cross $1 billion of valuation.
All right. And what would be a mix between wind as well as solar?
So of the first 1,000 megawatts, we have done 880 megawatts of wind and 180 megawatts of solar. If you look at our pipeline, on the other hand, a majority of that is in solar. About 1 out of the 1.1 gigawatts is solar, and the balance is wind. So as we build out all of this pipeline and get to the 2+ gigawatt number, we'll probably be half of wind and half of solar.
That is by when?
That is by, let's say, in the next 12 to 15 months.
All right. And so profitability-wise, I'm guessing that solar is better in terms of margins?
Not really. Not really. I think so far wind has been better. Solar, as you said earlier, tariffs have come down, so profitability in solar is a little bit lower at this point in time. What you do on the financing side actually has a big impact on returns as well. So I think going forward, we have to see how things evolve.
But cost efficiency when it comes to the solar energy part, is that also rapidly decreasing and is leaving wind energy behind to some extent?
To some extent, you're right. I think what has happened in solar is quite remarkable. You know, 5 years ago or 4 years ago, tariffs in solar were about 17 rupees a unit. Today, they're at 5 rupees a unit, right? That's absolutely phenomenal. I don't think anybody could have envisaged that solar tariffs would come down to such a large extent. And that is really what is giving us hope that in future, a lot of capacity addition will actually happen in solar. Now, of that reduction in tariff, a large part of it has come because of capital efficiency, of cost efficiency, as the performance of panels and technology in manufacturing has improved substantially. Part of it has also come from demand-supply imbalances on the supply side, as a result of which margins on the in the previous part of the value chains have also got squeezed a little bit, and partly, as I said, people are just being too aggressive. But all said and done, the fact that solar tariffs are at 5 rupees and thereabouts, wind is at 5 rupees to 5 rupees 50. There is pressure on the wind industry right now to find a way to cut their costs as well. Otherwise, over a period of time, as solar costs continue to trend downwards, wind is going to get outcompeted, and therefore we have to find a way of leveling the playing field. Today, wind equipment has an excise duty and customs duty on it, which is not there in solar. So the government should try to level the playing field there. I'm not saying they should put a levy on solar, but they should rather cut it on wind. That will bring the tariffs down. Then there are new turbines that are coming out with higher heights and longer blade lengths. Those are improving the efficiency of the wind turbines. So I think some cost reduction can come from there as well. But you will also have a situation where I think the OEMs will have to reduce some of their margins. So unfortunately in India you have a situation where in wind you have a large manufacturing industry, domestic manufacturing industry with a 10,000 megawatt capacity, lots of people employed. Solar, which is really where the government is putting its effort and driving the growth, has no manufacturing industry in India. So all of our solar panels are imported. And the government will have to figure out what is the right balance between this, because it's going to become a little bit imbalanced as we go forward, with the wind industry losing jobs, solar being more import driven.
Also.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So going forward, what do you see as, of course, these are some of the challenges that you mentioned, but on the operation bit also, there are a fair bit of challenges that need to be addressed at this point?
I think so. I think the biggest problem in India is land acquisition, and that is always a nightmare. And unfortunately, both wind and solar are land intensive, and so therefore we need to acquire large tracts of land. Now, what the government is doing in solar is they're actually trying to acquire revenue land by various state governments and aggregating those into solar parks, so that in the future at least capacity addition can come mostly out of solar parks, and that will make the land acquisition part in solar a lot easier. In wind, however, you can't do that because wind is all very separated and disaggregated, so in wind it's harder to do that. So let's see what happens on the wind side. The other problem is grid. And today renewables are a small part of the overall grid, but going forward it will become a very large part. Even at 10 to 15%, you start having grid management issues. And so the government needs to really do two things. One is they need to construct these green corridors much faster, so that we can actually take the power out from these producing areas like Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, etc., and move the power into areas where they need to be consumed. That's one very important thing. And the second thing is that solar peaks in the daytime, right? Wind peaks in the monsoon time. So the government needs to have a way of managing the excess supply and the fluctuation when it comes, which means that we need to have either storage through batteries, which is still expensive and today is not priced in India, or we need to have spinning reserves, which is the ability of having gas plants which can go on and off very quickly, or pumped hydro reservoirs. So either of these things or four things need to be done. And the last thing that they can do is they can actually manage the demand side through more innovative pricing, right? By forcing people or factories to consume at night time, right? Or not switch on air conditioners in the daytime, or some such incentives, pricing signals they'll have to give, which today it does not exist. And I think longer term, at some point they'll have to figure out how do we move from a distribution part of the industry, which is controlled by the state governments, to a situation where this industry also gets privatized, right? And that is really what the Electricity Act amendments that are in Parliament right now are contemplating it, but how it is to be implemented remains to be seen, and to me that's the biggest reform that needs to happen in the sector.
All right. And going forward also, Mr. Sinha, what will keep you in this sector? Is this sector, by nature of its presence and the way it is clean energy, and the entire world is moving towards clean energy, is that something that will keep the sector on? Because clearly it is more expensive than conventional forms of energy at this point.
It's not that much more expensive than conventional forms of energy, number one. Number two, if you price in the proper externalities of coal, which is all the pollution and the health issues and so on, which is very hard to price actually, then you might even argue that coal is and renewables are fairly competitive with each other. Some reports suggest that by year 2022 or something, solar energy will be cheaper than coal-based energy. It is very possible for that to happen. Certainly we would be delighted if that does happen. As I said, today it's already very competitive. Give it another 2-3 years, it will become certainly, I think, cheaper than coal. Maybe a little bit longer, maybe till 2022, but I think the trend is moving in that direction. Now the exciting thing that is going to happen is that at some point battery storage costs will also come down, and then this whole fluctuation part of renewables If that gets dealt with, then in actual fact, 6, 7, 8 years later, technology would have evolved to such a point that all future capacity addition will most likely be preferred to come from renewable sources than to come from fossil fuels. If you look at the Western world, most of them are moving away from coal now. And all the new capacity that is happening in, let's say, the US or in Europe, a vast majority of that, 80-90%, is coming from renewables only. Right? Even if you look at India, almost 30-35% is now coming from renewables. And I would not be surprised if 6-7 years later, because of the cost efficiencies that would have even further manifested themselves in solar and wind, that is really where most of the capacity addition comes from. And so I foresee a situation where whatever targets the government is setting right now, at some point become infructuous, because by that time, you'll want to go after the cheapest source, and that cheapest source also happens to be the cleanest source, and it happens to be renewables. So
I have reasons to believe in the projection that you're giving, because 5-7 years back, everybody used to say that solar will be much cheaper, and today we are at a point when solar is way cheaper than what it was a decade back. So definitely after a few years, probably technology will develop much further. But going forward, which is the next target for ReNew Power that we are watching out for?
So, you know, the first thing is that over the course of the last financial year, we started with about 500 megawatts of installed capacity. We ended with 1,000 megawatts. So we doubled our capacity. It will be our endeavor to double our capacity again this year, this financial year, and to end with as close to 2 gigawatts of installed capacity as possible. It may be a few months here and there, because, you know, there are always execution delays in India, but certainly our pipeline is there. You know, we should be getting it executed. So that would be our first target. And then as we do that, of course, we look to, with all the new auctions that are coming up, we look to keep building our pipeline in the space.
Is that target good enough for you, or comfortable enough for you to do value unlocking in the equity market?
I think so. I think so. Because, you know, with 2 gigawatts of installed capacity, you have a pretty sizable cash flow. You become a large-sized company. You're certainly going to be the largest company in the Indian renewable space, which is going to be growing very rapidly. So you'll have a pretty good position.
So next financial year or this financial year, we could expect something on those lines, given other conditions?
I think next financial year seems more likely, because, as I said, we've just raised a round of equity of $260 million in October last year. That will take some doing to get invested properly. But certainly we look at doing something next year. And as I said, we'll have to see how the pipeline shapes up. If it's more, you know, if it's a more aggressive build out than envisaged, then we may do something even earlier than that.
And to end with, Mr. Sinha, something more on the personal note. Your family comes from a political background. Is that something on the horizon for you personally as well?
No, actually, let me correct you. Our family comes from a bureaucratic background. My father was on the IAS when I was growing up. So
that's okay. Currently, your entire family is in politics.
That is true. That is true. But think of it this way. My father was also an entrepreneur. It was just that he's an entrepreneur in a different space. He happened to choose politics as his space to become an entrepreneur in. And I have chosen business to be the space that I want to be an entrepreneur.
Sometime later in life?
You know, I don't think so. I think 2 out of 3 in the family is a good enough number. And you know, there are many ways in which you can have impact and make a mark. And I think if this is going well enough, then why change one stack?
You're at least answering this question in a political manner, at least I can say that. Thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you, Mr. Sinha. Thank you.